Sometimes destiny arrives with the faintest heartbeat, buried beneath snow where no one thinks to listen. The wind swept across the frost-pine forest with a lonely whistle, carrying loose crystals of snow through the towering pines as Evelyn Carter tightened the faded wool cloak around her shoulders. Winter had settled hard over the northern territories, covering every trail beneath nearly 2 feet of fresh snow, yet she continued walking with careful determination. The small leather satchel hanging at her side held bundles of dried herbs, clean bandages, and glass bottles filled with remedies she had prepared herself before sunrise. Healing was never a profession that made anyone wealthy, especially not for an overlooked Omega living alone in a weathered cabin nearly 15 miles from the nearest village, but every family who knocked on her door left with a little more hope than they had carried in. The daylight had already begun fading when Evelyn paused beside a frozen creek. Something felt wrong. The forest, usually alive with distant birds and rustling branches, had fallen strangely silent. She closed her eyes, letting the cold air settle around her as she listened beyond the wind itself. At first there was nothing. Then, barely noticeable, came a faint rhythm that seemed almost impossible to hear. A heartbeat. Weak. Uneven. Hidden somewhere beneath the endless blanket of white. Evelyn dropped to one knee without hesitation. Her gloved hands brushed away layers of snow until her fingertips touched dark fabric instead of frozen ground. Her breath caught. Beneath the drift lay a young boy no older than 8, unconscious but still breathing. His silver-blonde hair was dusted with frost, and his pale face had nearly disappeared beneath the snow. Around his neck hung a broken chain, while the crest embroidered across his winter coat had been deliberately scratched beyond recognition, as though someone wanted the world to forget who he was. Evelyn gently lifted him into her arms, surprised by how light he felt. His pulse fluttered weakly against her fingers. "You're safe now," she whispered, though she had no idea whether he could hear her. Carrying him through the deep snow tested every ounce of her strength, yet she never slowed. Nearly an hour later the warm glow of her cabin appeared between the trees. She pushed open the wooden door with her shoulder, laid the child beside the fireplace, and carefully wrapped him in thick blankets while adding fresh logs to the fire. The room slowly filled with warmth, but the boy remained frighteningly still. Evelyn mixed crushed herbs with warm water before placing 2 trembling fingers against his wrist. The instant her skin touched his, a soft silver light shimmered beneath both of their hands. It lasted only a heartbeat before fading, leaving the room exactly as it had been. Evelyn blinked in confusion. She had spent years studying every healing tradition she could find, yet she had never seen anything like that. When she checked his pulse again, it was stronger. His breathing had steadied. Color slowly returned to his cheeks. Relief washed over her, though questions quickly followed. Who was this child? Why had someone erased the symbol on his coat? And why had a single touch from her hand awakened something no healer had ever taught her? Outside, unseen through the swirling snowfall, a lone gray wolf stood motionless among the trees. Its bright silver eyes watched the tiny cabin from the shadows before disappearing silently into the dark, carrying news that would soon shake an entire kingdom. The fire crackled softly through the night while snow tapped against the cabin windows like patient fingers searching for shelter. Evelyn Carter remained beside the narrow bed, replacing the cool cloth across the boy's forehead every few minutes as the steady rhythm of his breathing slowly filled the quiet room. Whatever mysterious light had passed between them seemed to have faded completely, leaving only questions that refused to leave her mind. She had treated injured hunters, wandering travelers, frightened children, and aging farmers, but never had a single touch restored someone so quickly. As dawn approached, pale sunlight slipped through the frosted glass, and the boy's eyelashes fluttered. His bright blue eyes opened only halfway before settling on Evelyn's face. Confusion filled them first, followed by an unexpected sense of calm. He did not ask where he was. He simply reached for her hand with surprising certainty. The moment his small fingers wrapped around hers, the uneasy lines across his forehead disappeared, and he drifted back into peaceful sleep. Evelyn stared at him in silence. It was as though her presence alone had become part of his healing. Miles away, inside Blackwood Castle, the atmosphere could not have been more different. Servants hurried through echoing corridors while royal guards entered and exited the great hall with growing urgency. Maps covered the long oak table beneath towering windows, each marked with fresh reports from search parties that had combed forests, rivers, and mountain trails since the previous evening. At the head of the room stood Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood. His expression remained calm, but every person present could feel the weight of restrained worry beneath his composed exterior. No one dared speak unless spoken to. His son had vanished during what should have been a routine journey through protected territory, and every passing hour deepened the mystery. Scouts reported finding scattered footprints that disappeared beneath fresh snowfall. Others discovered fragments of a royal cloak with the family crest scratched beyond recognition. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase every sign pointing toward the missing heir. Nathaniel studied each report carefully before quietly ordering another search to begin farther north, beyond the frozen creek where few travelers ever ventured during winter. Back inside the cabin, Evelyn prepared warm broth while the boy finally awakened again. This time he looked around with greater awareness, his gaze moving from the stone fireplace to the wooden shelves lined with herbs before returning to her. He frowned slightly as though trying to remember something important. "Do you remember your name?" Evelyn asked gently. The child lowered his eyes, searching memories that refused to appear. After several long seconds he shook his head. "I only remember, Snow," he whispered. His voice was barely louder than the fire. "And someone telling me to keep running." Evelyn offered him a reassuring smile, careful not to press him further. Trauma often stole memories before returning them little by little. As she handed him a steaming cup, he hesitated only briefly before accepting it. "Thank you," he said with quiet sincerity. The words warmed her heart far more than the fire ever could. Neither of them noticed the faint silver glow that briefly shimmered beneath the cup as both of their hands touched it at the same moment. Outside, hidden among the towering pines, 3 royal wolves silently followed fresh tracks leading straight toward the lonely cabin, unaware that the child they had searched for through an endless winter night had already found the one person destiny had chosen to protect him. By late afternoon the storm had finally loosened its grip on the forest, allowing pale winter sunlight to spill across the frozen clearing outside Evelyn Carter's cabin. The young boy stood carefully near the porch, wrapped in one of Evelyn's oversized wool coats while tiny flakes drifted lazily through the crisp air. He looked healthier than he had any right to after everything she had found him through, yet something about his recovery defied every lesson she had ever learned. His strength returned a little more with every passing hour, but only while she remained close. The moment Evelyn stepped inside to gather fresh herbs, an unexpected chill swept across the boy's face. His shoulders drooped, and he instinctively turned toward the cabin door. The uneasy feeling disappeared the instant she returned carrying a basket filled with dried lavender and mountain sage. She noticed the change immediately. "Are you feeling cold again?" she asked softly. The boy hesitated before answering. "Only when you are far away." His innocent words caught her completely off guard. She smiled gently, believing it was simply the fear of a frightened child who had awakened among strangers, yet somewhere deep inside she sensed there was another explanation waiting beyond her understanding. As the afternoon faded into evening, Evelyn prepared another simple meal while the boy sat beside the fireplace drawing shapes across a piece of parchment she had found inside an old cupboard. At first they appeared to be meaningless lines, but as the picture slowly took form, Evelyn felt her heartbeat quicken. He had sketched a magnificent castle surrounded by towering black walls and ancient pine forests. Above the tallest tower flew a royal banner bearing the outline of a silver wolf beneath a full moon. Although the crest itself remained unfinished, Evelyn recognized the symbol from stories every child in the Northern Territories had heard growing up. It belonged to the royal family of Blackwood. Before she could ask another question, the boy frowned and rubbed his temples. "I do not know why I drew it," he whispered. "My hands simply remembered." Evelyn knelt beside him and gently rested her hand against his shoulder. Once again, the faint silver glow shimmered beneath her fingertips before disappearing almost as quickly as it had appeared. This time she was certain she had not imagined it. Across the kingdom, Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood stood alone on the highest balcony of the castle, overlooking endless snow-covered hills that stretched toward the distant frostpine forest. His advisors had urged him to rest, but sleep had become impossible. Every report arriving from the search parties carried another unanswered question. Then, just before sunset, a seasoned royal scout entered the great hall carrying fresh tracks drawn carefully across a parchment map. "Your Majesty," the scout said, lowering his head respectfully, "we found evidence of a small cabin hidden beyond the frozen creek. There are 2 sets of footprints. One belongs to an adult woman. The other matches the size of a young child." Nathaniel studied the map in silence. Something inside him stirred with cautious hope, yet years of ruling had taught him never to trust hope too quickly. "Prepare my horse," he ordered calmly. "We leave immediately." As darkness settled once more over the quiet forest, Evelyn tucked another blanket around the sleeping boy before adding fresh wood to the fire. She never noticed the silver thread of light that briefly connected their hands before fading into the warm glow of the flames, nor did she realize that less than 5 miles away, the Alpha King himself was already riding through the snow toward the little cabin where destiny had quietly begun rewriting all of their lives. Moonlight filtered through the snow-covered branches as the quiet rhythm of hoofbeats echoed deeper into frostpine forest. Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood rode at the front of a small royal escort, his sharp silver eyes studying every frozen trail illuminated by lantern light. The fresh tracks discovered earlier had survived the snowfall just long enough to guide them toward a destination no map had ever marked. Every instinct he possessed told him his son was close, yet another instinct, one he could not explain, urged patience instead of haste. At the cabin, Evelyn Carter was carefully placing another log onto the fire when the boy suddenly looked toward the window. His expression changed from peaceful curiosity to anxious recognition. "Someone is coming," he whispered. Evelyn listened carefully before hearing the distant sound herself. "Horses. Several of them." She stepped outside onto the porch just as 4 riders emerged from between the towering pines. The man leading them carried himself with effortless authority. His black winter cloak moved gently in the evening wind, and even beneath the falling snow his presence seemed to quiet the entire forest. Evelyn had never stood before the Alpha King, but every story she had heard suddenly became real the moment their eyes met. Nathaniel slowly dismounted without removing his gaze from the young healer. Before either of them spoke, the cabin door opened behind Evelyn. The little boy stepped outside, clutching the edge of the oversized coat she had lent him. The instant Nathaniel saw the child standing safely in the warm glow spilling from the cabin, relief flashed across his face before disappearing beneath the calm discipline expected of a king. The boy looked at the tall stranger for several long seconds. Something familiar stirred behind his eyes, yet memory refused to fully return. Nathaniel took one careful step forward. "My son," he said quietly, his voice carrying more warmth than anyone in his kingdom had heard in years. The child tilted his head in confusion. "I do not remember." Those words settled heavily over the snowy clearing. Nathaniel remained perfectly still, refusing to pressure the frightened boy. Instead, his attention shifted toward Evelyn. "Who are you?" he asked with measured calm. "My name is Evelyn Carter. I found him buried beneath the snow 3 nights ago. I only wanted to save his life." Nathaniel studied her expression without interruption. There was no fear hidden behind her eyes, only quiet sincerity and exhaustion earned through sleepless nights beside a child she had never met. One of the royal guards stepped closer after noticing the damaged royal coat resting near the cabin entrance. "Your Majesty," he said cautiously, "this matches the missing prince's clothing." The discovery changed the atmosphere immediately. Questions filled every silent glance exchanged among the escort. Why had the royal crest been destroyed? Who had hidden the child? Why had an unknown Omega become the one to find him? Nathaniel looked back toward Evelyn. Logic urged caution. His duty demanded answers before trust. Yet every instinct he had sharpened through years of leadership insisted that the woman before him was protecting something precious rather than hiding something dangerous. Before he could speak again, the young boy suddenly crossed the snowy porch and reached for Evelyn's hand. The moment their fingers touched, a faint silver glow shimmered between them once more. This time Nathaniel saw it clearly. So did every royal guard standing behind him. Silence settled over the clearing as each witness struggled to understand what they had just seen. The light vanished almost instantly, but its memory remained. Nathaniel slowly lowered his voice. "Bring them both to Blackwood Castle," he instructed his escort. "Not as prisoners." His silver eyes never left Evelyn. "As honored guests. There are truths waiting inside these walls that none of us understand yet." The journey to Blackwood Castle stretched across nearly 20 miles of snow-covered valleys, yet the silence inside the royal carriage felt far longer. Evelyn Carter sat beside the young prince, who had quietly fallen asleep with one small hand resting over hers as though he feared she might disappear if he let go. Every few minutes Nathaniel Blackwood glanced toward his son from across the carriage. The child had refused food offered by the royal attendants during the ride, but he accepted every sip of warm tea Evelyn placed into his hands without hesitation. None of it made sense. The prince had always been independent, confident, and remarkably composed for his age. Now he instinctively sought comfort from a woman he had never known before. As the castle gates slowly opened beneath the fading afternoon light, physicians, advisors, and servants hurried into the grand entrance hall. News of the prince's return had spread through every corridor within minutes. The royal healers immediately requested permission to examine him, and Nathaniel quietly nodded. Evelyn stepped back as they surrounded the child with polished instruments, ancient herbs, and crystals traditionally used to measure a wolf's life force. For nearly an hour they worked with careful precision while Nathaniel waited without speaking. Finally the eldest healer lowered his spectacles and frowned. "His body is healthy," the elderly physician said. "His heartbeat is stable. His breathing is strong. Every wound has completely disappeared." Relief softened the faces around the room until the prince suddenly reached toward Evelyn from across the chamber. The moment she moved farther than a few feet away, the color slowly faded from his cheeks. His breathing became noticeably weaker, and an uncomfortable weariness settled over him. Concern spread through the room. "Bring the healer closer," the physician instructed. Evelyn stepped beside the bed and gently took the child's hand. Within seconds warmth returned to his skin. His breathing steadied once again, and his pulse resumed its calm rhythm. A quiet murmur swept through the chamber. The royal physicians repeated the observation several more times, carefully changing positions, measuring his pulse, and recording every result. The pattern never changed. Distance weakened him. Her touch restored him. Nathaniel watched every moment with growing disbelief. This was beyond ordinary healing. It was as though the boy's body recognized Evelyn before his own memories could. The eldest healer requested a small sample of the prince's blood for one final examination. Under the glow of enchanted crystal lamps, he placed a single crimson drop beside a strand of silver-infused testing thread. As everyone observed in silence, the thread unexpectedly shifted into a brilliant silver glow before slowly weaving itself into the shape of a delicate circle. The old healer stared at the impossible result, then carefully compared it with records preserved inside an ancient leather journal. His weathered hands trembled ever so slightly. "Your Majesty," he whispered, "there is an unfamiliar energy flowing through the prince's blood. It does not resemble illness, poison, or any healing magic known to this kingdom." Nathaniel's expression remained calm, but his attention sharpened. "Can you identify its source?" The old healer slowly lifted his eyes toward Evelyn. "Only one thing is certain. Whatever preserved the young prince's life, began the moment this woman touched him." Evelyn instinctively looked down at her own hands, remembering every mysterious silver shimmer she had witnessed since the snowy night in the forest. She had believed they were isolated miracles. Now an entire room of experienced healers had seen undeniable proof that something extraordinary connected her to the child. None of them realized that somewhere deep within the royal archives, hidden behind locked stone doors untouched for generations, an ancient record already held the forgotten answer they had been searching for. The remarkable discovery spread quietly through Blackwood Castle, but not everyone welcomed it with hope. While the royal physicians continued comparing notes inside the healing chamber, another pair of watchful eyes followed every word from the edge of the room. High Elder Cedric Ashthorne, the kingdom's most respected royal advisor, remained perfectly composed as he listened to the impossible findings. His silver-embroidered robes and gentle smile projected wisdom earned through decades of service, yet behind his calm expression, his thoughts raced in an entirely different direction. He had devoted years to shaping the future of the kingdom according to carefully arranged plans, and none of those plans included an unknown Omega healer appearing beside the young prince at the exact moment the royal bloodline stood on uncertain ground. As the meeting concluded, Cedric quietly excused himself and disappeared into the eastern corridors where only senior members of the royal council were permitted to enter. Nathaniel noticed the elder's unusual haste but chose to remain beside his son instead. For the first time since the frightening disappearance, the prince rested peacefully, his breathing calm while Evelyn sat nearby reading from an old collection of woodland stories she had found in the castle library. Every page she turned seemed to relax the child even further. Although fragments of memory still escaped him, he smiled more often now than anyone had expected. Nathaniel observed them from the doorway without announcing his presence. His son laughed softly at one of the stories, and Evelyn answered with the quiet warmth that had always come naturally to her. It was a simple moment, yet something about it eased a burden the Alpha King had carried for days. Even so, questions remained unanswered. Why did the prince respond only to Evelyn? Why had mysterious silver light appeared whenever they touched? And why did Nathaniel himself feel an unfamiliar sense of calm whenever she entered the room? Across the castle, Cedric unlocked a hidden chamber beneath the ancient archive. Shelves filled with sealed records surrounded a stone table covered by faded maps and family histories. He removed a small wooden box from a concealed compartment and slowly unfolded several weathered letters written decades earlier. His expression hardened as he reread a forgotten prophecy describing an ancient bond capable of changing the royal succession forever. Before he could study it further, a trusted messenger entered quietly. Cedric lowered the documents immediately. "Has anyone else connected the healer to the old records?" he asked. The messenger shook his head. "No, my lord. They believe it is only an unusual healing gift." Cedric released a measured breath. "Then it must remain that way for now." His words carried neither anger nor panic, only careful calculation. Meanwhile, Evelyn stepped into the castle gardens just before sunset, hoping the fresh winter air might clear her thoughts. Snow rested gently across stone pathways while golden light reflected from frozen fountains. She looked toward the distant mountains, wondering how her quiet life had transformed so completely within only a few days. Footsteps approached behind her. Nathaniel stopped several feet away, allowing respectful distance. "The physicians tell me my son becomes stronger every hour because of you," he said. Evelyn lowered her eyes modestly. "I wish I understood why." Nathaniel studied her for a long moment before answering. "So do I." Neither of them noticed a silent figure watching from an upper balcony. Cedric remained hidden behind carved stone columns, his thoughtful gaze fixed upon the quiet conversation below. If the forgotten truth hidden inside the ancient records ever reached the Alpha King, everything the elder had spent years carefully protecting could change forever. Morning sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows of Blackwood Castle, scattering silver and gold across the ancient library where generations of royal history had been preserved. Nathaniel Blackwood stood beside the towering shelves while the elderly chief librarian carefully unlocked a stone cabinet that had remained sealed for decades. The strange connection between Evelyn Carter and the young prince had left too many questions unanswered, and the Alpha King had finally decided that the kingdom's oldest records might reveal what modern healers could not. Dust drifted through the quiet room as the librarian carried out a weathered volume bound in dark leather. Its pages had yellowed with age, yet the silver wolf embossed across its cover remained untouched by time. The old man slowly opened the book, turning page after page until he stopped at a faded illustration unlike anything Nathaniel had ever seen. It showed an Alpha King standing beside an Omega Healer while streams of silver light flowed between them before surrounding a young child. Beneath the drawing were words written in an ancient hand. The librarian adjusted his spectacles before reading aloud. There exists a bond older than ceremonial markings and older than royal law. It is awakened not by ambition nor by ritual, but by selfless devotion to the life carried within the Alpha's bloodline. Nathaniel listened without interrupting. The words settled heavily in the silent chamber. Such a bond may awaken before either soul recognizes its existence, the librarian continued. Its first sign is life restored through a touch that carries neither spell nor command. Its second sign is the child of the Alpha finding peace only within the presence of the destined healer. The final sign is the quiet joining of two hearts long before either understands they have already become one. Nathaniel lowered his eyes toward the illustration again. Every sign described inside the forgotten record matched the impossible events unfolding inside his own castle. At that same moment, Evelyn sat beside the prince in the royal garden where fresh snow sparkled beneath the gentle winter sun. The child laughed as a pair of white doves landed nearby, happily scattering tiny seeds across the stone path. His memories were returning little by little. "I remember the castle fountain," he suddenly said with growing excitement. "And my father teaching me how to ride." Evelyn smiled warmly. "Those are wonderful memories." The boy looked at her thoughtfully before asking the question she had quietly feared. "Why do I feel safe whenever you are near?" Evelyn searched for an answer she did not possess. Before she could speak, the familiar silver glow appeared once more where their hands rested together on the wooden bench. This time it lingered several heartbeats longer than ever before, shimmering like moonlight dancing across still water. Nathaniel had stepped into the garden only moments earlier and witnessed everything from a short distance away. Instead of fear, an unexpected calm settled over him. The forgotten record echoed inside his thoughts with every passing second. He slowly approached until the glow gently faded into the morning air. Neither Evelyn nor the young prince noticed the quiet realization beginning to form behind the Alpha King's silver eyes. Hidden behind a nearby stone archway, however, Cedric Ashthorne watched the scene unfold with growing concern. He had hoped the ancient truth would remain buried forever, but now he understood that destiny was moving faster than even the oldest secrets could contain, and for the first time in many years, the future of Blackwood Castle no longer belonged to carefully written plans. It belonged to a bond that had already begun the moment one compassionate healer chose to save a child beneath the winter snow. The peaceful rhythm that had settled over Blackwood Castle lasted only until the evening bells echoed across the snowy courtyard. A royal messenger hurried through the grand hall carrying a sealed report recovered from the abandoned trail where the young prince had first disappeared. Nathaniel Blackwood accepted the parchment in silence, carefully studying the familiar handwriting preserved beneath the royal seal. It was the final journal entry written by the captain assigned to protect his son. Although damaged by snow and time, one sentence remained perfectly clear. "Trust no one inside the council until the truth reveals itself." Nathaniel slowly folded the parchment. The warning confirmed what his instincts had already begun to suspect. The danger had never come from the frozen wilderness alone. It had followed his family from within the castle itself. Determined to protect the prince while uncovering the truth, Nathaniel quietly ordered the royal household to remain inside the palace until every member of the council had been questioned. No accusations were spoken aloud, yet an invisible tension settled across every corridor. Evelyn sensed it immediately. Servants smiled less often. Guards doubled their watch. Even the cheerful voices that usually filled the dining hall became careful whispers. The young prince noticed the change as well. That evening, while Evelyn helped him arrange wooden figures across a small table beside the fireplace, he suddenly froze with one carved wolf still resting in his hand. His eyes widened as another memory surfaced. "I remember a silver ring," he whispered. "A man told everyone to leave, and then he said I must never reach the northern forest." Evelyn listened quietly, allowing him to speak without interruption. "Can you remember who the man was?" she asked gently. The boy closed his eyes, trying desperately to hold on to the fading memory. "No," he answered softly. "I only remember his ring." Before either of them could say another word, a warm silver glow blossomed between their joined hands, brighter than ever before. Instead of fading within seconds, the gentle light expanded around them like a protective circle, bathing the room in a calm radiance that carried neither fear nor force, only unmistakable peace. Nathaniel entered the chamber at that exact moment. He stopped without speaking, watching the extraordinary sight unfold before his eyes. The prince looked healthier than he had since returning home. His smile had returned completely. Even the lingering uncertainty inside the room seemed to dissolve beneath the quiet light. Nathaniel approached slowly until he stood beside Evelyn. The silver glow stretched outward, briefly surrounding him as well. An unexpected warmth settled across his chest, familiar in a way he could not explain. It felt less like discovering something new and more like remembering something his heart had always known. The light gradually disappeared, leaving only silence behind. Nathaniel looked first at his son, then at Evelyn. "You are no longer simply the woman who saved my child," he said quietly. "Whatever binds this family together began long before any of us understood it." Evelyn lowered her eyes, overwhelmed by words she could not answer. High above them, hidden behind the carved balcony overlooking the great hall, Cedric Ashthorne witnessed everything. For the first time, uncertainty crossed the elder's composed face. The forgotten bond described in the ancient records was no longer theory. It was awakening exactly as the old prophecy had foretold, and with every passing hour it became clearer that no secret, no careful plan, and no hidden ambition would be strong enough to silence the destiny quietly unfolding inside Blackwood Castle. The first snowfall of the new moon season covered Blackwood Castle in a quiet blanket of silver as the royal council gathered beneath the towering ceiling of the great hall. Every noble family, every village elder, and every member of the royal guard had been summoned after Nathaniel Blackwood announced that the mystery surrounding his son's disappearance had finally reached its conclusion. The young prince stood confidently beside Evelyn Carter, no longer pale or uncertain, but smiling with the calm strength that had slowly returned since the day she found him beneath the snow. The last fragments of his memory had come back during the previous night. He remembered becoming separated from his escort after following an injured white fox deeper into the forest. He remembered losing his way as the storm grew stronger. He remembered protecting the royal crest beneath his coat because his father had once told him that a king's symbol represented responsibility rather than privilege. No hidden enemy had taken him. Fear and confusion had simply allowed misunderstanding to grow where truth had been waiting all along. Nathaniel stepped before the assembled kingdom and spoke with the quiet confidence that had earned the loyalty of every pack under his protection. "Many believe this story began with loss," he said. "Instead, it began with compassion. One woman chose to help a child without asking his name, his title, or what she might receive in return." His silver eyes turned toward Evelyn. She acted because someone needed her. A respectful silence filled the hall. The chief librarian then presented the restored ancient record before the council, explaining the forgotten bond described by generations long past. It was never a bond created through ambition or ceremony. It awakened only when a selfless heart preserved the future of an alpha's bloodline with complete sincerity. The silver light everyone had witnessed was not ordinary healing. It was the first visible sign that destiny had quietly united two lives before either soul understood what had already begun. Evelyn lowered her gaze, overwhelmed by the realization that every impossible moment since the frozen forest had been leading toward this truth. Nathaniel slowly crossed the hall until he stood before her. Without hesitation or royal pride, the Alpha King lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps echoed softly through the chamber, not because a king had knelt, but because he had done so with genuine humility. "Evelyn Carter," he said gently, "the ancient bond may have chosen us before we recognized it, but my heart has reached its own decision. You gave my son hope. You reminded me that true strength begins with kindness. If you are willing, I would be honored to walk beside you not only as my destined mate, but as my partner, my equal, and the future Queen of Blackwood." Tears shimmered in Evelyn's eyes as she offered him her hand. "Yes," she whispered with a smile that carried every ounce of quiet courage that had guided her from a lonely cabin to the heart of a kingdom. The moment their hands met, a gentle silver light surrounded them once more, flowing upward like moonlight carried by the winter wind before fading peacefully into the bright morning sky. The young prince laughed with unmistakable joy and wrapped his arms around both of them. "I knew we were supposed to stay together," he said. Warm laughter spread throughout the hall, replacing every lingering shadow of uncertainty. Even Cedric Ashthorne, standing among the council, quietly lowered his head as he accepted that some futures were never meant to be controlled. They were meant to be embraced. As the royal family stepped onto the castle balcony overlooking thousands of wolves gathered below, cheers rolled across the snow-covered valley like a welcoming chorus. Nathaniel held Evelyn's hand without hesitation, the young prince standing proudly between them, while the winter sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. In that quiet golden light, the kingdom witnessed something greater than an ancient bond fulfilled. They witnessed a simple truth that would be remembered for generations. The greatest healers do not change the world because they seek power. They change it because they choose compassion first, and sometimes that single choice becomes the beginning of a destiny that transforms every heart it touches.